So today I want to talk about how I scan film, both 35 millimeters and 120 film, and I do so with the Fujifilm x-t4. So I want to share with you guys kind of my setup, the materials, the accessories, all the things I use, and including the kind of way I go about getting the best scans that I could possibly get at my own home. Because scanning film can be a little bit of an arduous process in the beginning, some things are a little bit confusing, you might not get things right, and then some things are not quite optimized towards your workflow as well. So it can be a bit of a tough process to figure out. I want to share with you guys the things I've learned, at least when I tried to figure out the best workflow for my purposes, and just overall share with you guys the mistakes I've made when scanning film in the past as well. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. It might be a bit of a lengthier video, but we'll start with the materials I use, and then we'll go ahead and go into the process of scanning film itself. So hopefully we get through this in one piece. First off, the camera I use, I do a digital kind of scanning with the Fujifilm x-t4 and a macro lens. So you can go about scanning film in multiple different ways. Just a kind of basic general overview. You can go with the lab scanning method where you basically give them your film roll or whatever, and they kind of develop and scan it for you as well. That's probably going to give you one of your best results because labs are generally really good at that, and they have all the equipment and stuff necessary. If you want to scan film yourself, you're going to have to go through a little bit of a process of getting the materials ahead of time, so it's going to require a little bit of investment in terms of money, but overall you're going to save more money in the long term, because I think some lab scans take up as much as like $6 or $8 a roll, which is, to be honest, if you're shooting a lot of film, it kind of adds up really quickly, so it might be worthwhile to invest into a setup of your own. And the way I go about it is I do digital film scanning. You can get a flatbed scanner as well. I've tried that in the past with materials such as the Epson V600, but I found myself kind of in a rut doing so. The scans I had gotten from the Epson V600 were great, but I had some problems that I was annoyed about. One, using a flatbed scanner takes a lot more time than digital film scanning. So scanning with something like the Epson V600 would take me, I don't know, 30 minutes or an hour to process all of the scans from just one 35 millimeter roll. And to be honest, if I was scanning a bunch of rolls at one time, then it would take me a long time. I just simply didn't have the time to wait for the scanner to process all of the images and whatnot. So that's why I eventually returned my Epson V600 and then just decided to go with a digital film scanning route. Digital film scanning is quite interesting because basically all you're doing is you're just taking a picture of the film itself and then converting it later in, Lightroom or something like that. It's pretty similar to what you'd be doing with a flatbed scanner, but kind of the results are going to be slightly worse in my opinion. I think the overall DPI and resolution that you would get from something like a TIFF scan from a flatbed scanner is better, but the raw file from something like a digital scan is not bad, to be honest. I honestly don't think there is that big enough of a difference in terms of image quality for me to stick to flatbed scanning. That's just my personal opinion. So when it comes to digital film scanning, that's the method we're going to kind of talk about today. You're just going to need a digital camera and a macro lens. So first material, like I said, is a macro lens. This is probably one of the most important things, particularly because a macro lens, if you guys know what a macro lens is or what it does, a lot of people use it for things like macro photography, where it allows you to get really, really close to your subject. So if you see people taking images of like flowers or bees or other insects or something like that, they are able to get a really close up, almost like a bug's life perspective sort of thing on their images. And the reason why you need a macro lens when you want to scan film is because we're taking a picture of a very physical object and then converting that into a digital, image sort of thing. So if we want to get the most real or lifelike perspective of that image, then we're going to need a macro lens because the magnification ratio changes kind of the proportions of the image and also how the resolution kind of scans. So typically, people recommend as close to a 1-to-1 magnification ratio as you can get. Certain macro lenses have different magnification ratios, but the one I'm using right here is the TT Artisan macro lens 40mm f2.8, I believe it is. I talked about this lens in a review maybe a few months ago or something like that, and although it's not the greatest macro lens, it's sufficient and it's good enough for what I do. So if you see on the side here, as I change the manual focus, you'll notice that the magnification ratio appears on the side. So there will be a 1:1 magnification ratio, 1:2, etc., etc. And ideally, if we want the most accurate film scan, we would want the closest we can get to a 1:1 magnification ratio. But unfortunately, with the setup I use, I can only kind of compromise in between the two. There are, some caveats to this, and I'll kind of explain why later. Next thing you'll need would be a tripod. Right now I'm using a mini tripod right here. This one is from Sandmark. I also used an Aoka mini tripod before, but I've since switched to this one because the Aoka tripod was giving me some problems. The connections were loose and I thought that was just kind of annoying. The only caveat with this tripod is that while the connections are good and stable, I've noticed the legs kind of start slipping because there are no clear indicators as to where the legs should stand. So I find that kind of annoying. Sometimes if I try to scan film, I'll notice one of the legs starts to drop a little bit and it doesn't hold perfectly. So it's not the most perfect solution, but this is the tripod I'm currently using for scanning film. I might get an actual, like a big tripod, because honestly, these mini tripods are kind of giving me some problems, so I might just have to upgrade and deal with the kind of bigger size of a larger tripod, but hopefully that will give me more consistent, setup. The next thing you will need will be a film holder and a light box sort of thing. So a film holder is important because it's what's going to hold your film, still and steady and flat while you scan your film. And then the light box, you're basically going to place under the film holder, project upwards, shoot light through it, and then it will allow you to scan your negatives properly. So there are many different routes you can go in this scenario. A lot of people I've seen on YouTube and whatnot, they are using the setup that requires the essential film holder and then just kind of a light box underneath. I personally have chosen against this route, particularly because the essential film holder, it costs about maybe 100. I forget the exact prices, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems kind of like a plastic material kind of film holder. And although it seems to work really well, if I went with the essential film holder, I think I could have probably just made something like that myself and gotten some similar results and not have had to spend so much money, So nothing against the essential film holder, it's just I've opted to go a different route. Something else I've seen other people use are the negative supply kind of materials, and these seem like really, really good, products, but they were just kind of out of budget and expensive for me personally. So what I've done is I've opted to get the Sunray Skier copy box, and there isn't too much information about this setup online, particularly because I think it's a Taiwanese brand. I'm not entirely sure. I've went with this kind of solution because it was a film holder and a kind of light box kind of built in, one connected together, so I thought this would simplify my setup in the best way possible. If you went with a different route, you would have to buy the film holder and also a light box separately, and that would probably cost just about as much. So I spent about $270 or so on this setup, and it is a little expensive, but I think the materials were worth it because it was pretty well built. I paid for and got two film holders in one. So I got the 35mm film holder and also the 120mm film holder. And I also got the light box, which has a diffuser, and it's also very color accurate. So when you're scanning film, just something to keep in mind, you want something that is at least 95 CRI. I believe this one has 95 or 99, but that's just the specs you want so you can ensure that you get a color accurate film negative. Because when you're shooting light through the film negative, sometimes you can lose color accuracy if you don't have the right kind of light box or film panel underneath or diffuser underneath. Whatever the science or technicalities happens to be, that's just something to keep in mind. So that's why I opted with the Skier Sunray copy box, because it had pretty much everything I needed it to have. It also has an option where it comes with a 4x5 film holder as well, but that one costed more, and I personally don't shoot any 4x5, at least right now. So that's why I got what I got. This was a great solution in my opinion. It's worked out well because something I've noticed with the Epson V600 in the past was that the film holders didn't really hold my film flat and they were annoying to work with. So this copy box that I'm using right now, it works really, really well. It's really well built. The metal film holders, they don't really cause me any problems. I've seen in forums online that some people were concerned that these might cause scratches on your film, but I haven't had any problems with that, just because I've noticed that the metal part that holds my film when I'm sliding it through and scanning it and whatnot is that it holds it on the border of the film. So I don't actually have to worry about the metal part touching the image part of my film negative. So I haven't had any scratches or anything like that. And if I did have scratches, they would be on the border of my film, not on the image. So it's not something that I've concerned myself about, if that's something you were wondering. Okay, a lot of talking. Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of like tired, but I have to kind of buzz through this because there's a lot of kind of little things I have to talk about right now. But those are the materials. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. If I did, I'll just bring it up later. But now to go about scanning. So once you have everything ready, scanning film at home can be a little bit tedious because it requires you get all the materials up front. But once you have it, all you have to really worry about is the setup, getting the most efficient setup, and then scanning film should be kind of a breeze. So, two materials I forgot to mention. You are going to need the white cotton gloves that pretty much every photographer has. These are important because they prevent you from getting oil on your film, and oil can damage your film in the long run, especially if you are, thinking about preserving your film or archiving your film. It's not too much of a concern, however, because ideally you just want one master scan or master copy of your film, and then you shouldn't have to ever pull your film out of, the box you're storing it in. It just kind of stays there. But it is a good practice to keep in hand. Just having these gloves on hand prevents you from touching the film directly and ruining your image, sort of thing. And of course, you're going to need a rocket blower. This is probably one of the most important parts because it prevents you from getting dust on your film. Film is the best condition and most dust-free when you get it back from the lab. And anytime after that, you're pretty much going to accumulate dust because dust is the enemy of film and it exists everywhere in your room and you're not going to be able to see it sometimes. So it's really important that you do have a rocket blower and you always blow your film with some air before you do scan it, so the dust doesn't appear on the scans or the negatives later when you are looking at it in post. That's probably one of the most annoying things that comes up. And whenever I see it, I kind of sigh because then I have to rescan my film and it's a whole annoying process sort of thing that you have to go through. So make sure you blow your film before you scan it. And sometimes if I remember, I think I forgot to blow this one with air before I took a picture, I'll just go back and do the whole roll again because it's just not worth going and waiting and seeing in post and realizing that I messed up, All right, so now that we got that out of the way, we got all the materials, we're ready to scan our film, we got our film roll back from the lab, and we're ready to go. So ideally, when we're setting up and scanning our film, we want our camera to be in as flat or as level of a plane as possible. So pretty much directly over our copy box where we are scanning our film. Some other things to keep in mind is that we also want to keep our film as flat as possible. So usually the film holder kind of helps with this, but if your film holder is kind of a little more janky or whatever, and you got your film roll back from the lab in a roll, then you might want to flatten out your roll before you start scanning. It'll just make the process much easier. And you can do this by just leaving it in the plastic and then kind of compressing it in between two books or something like that until it does eventually flatten out. From there, we basically set up our tripod, keeping it as, much of the same parallel kind of plane as our copy box. Ideally, we want our film roll or the frame of our film to fill up as much of our frame in our digital camera as much as possible so we don't lose any resolution. So for 35mm film, I find it's fairly easy. I can get through this process because the aspect ratio is the same. But for a medium format, I shoot 6x6. So the square aspect ratio, I actually have to crop out of my digital scans. And then I lose some kind of resolution along the way. Some people do panorama stitching so you can kind of mediate the loss of resolution by stitching this together in Lightroom. Personally, I don't prefer that because I prefer just to take one image, one picture of each image, and then just be on my way kind of like that. And then so if I'm doing panorama stitching, sometimes I'll have to take as many as 4 frames, and then sometimes the software kind of messes up on me later, and that's just kind of an annoying process that I don't want to deal with. So that's just something to keep in mind depending on the type of format you're shooting or the aspect ratio you're shooting. Maybe you're shooting 6:4:5 or 6:7 or something like that. You're gonna have to keep in mind that if your digital camera does not match the same aspect ratio, you might gain or lose some resolution because the frame doesn't fill up perfectly. But that's okay, because I've noticed even scanning 6x6, I'm still able to get sufficient resolution even though I'm cropping at the sides. The scans look fine to me, and they worked out fine on print when I'm printing pictures, so I don't think I've lost too much DPI or resolution or anything like that sort of thing if you're concerned about that. But of course, you know, fine tune it, experiment with it, see what works best for you. So in terms of camera settings, I would recommend shooting at least f8 or aperture 8 to 11, because this is how it works, so you can get kind of everything in focus, and then kind of try and keep your ISO at as low of a setting as possible. Typically, I like to keep my shutter speed at least 125, sometimes even higher, because camera shake can affect the way your digital images come out, and you don't want any kind of shake ruining your scan or anything like that. So I personally prefer to have at least, shutter speed at 1/125th of a second. In terms of actually taking the picture itself, I like to keep a timer, so the X-T4 has a timer of 10 seconds or 2 seconds. Typically I have it at 2 seconds, because then I could just press it and then take my hand off it, and then there's no shake when the camera actually takes an image. But I know a lot of people like to use cable releases. That's probably a good way to get stable scans as well. Personally, I think a timer works just perfectly fine. I don't have to worry too much about anything like that. Something that I've done that I've noticed that also allows me to get the right focus when I'm scanning images is that I like to punch in. So the Fujifilm X-t4, you can punch into your focus so you can more accurately see what you're looking at. And it also has focus peaking, but I would recommend not 100% relying on focus peaking, but rather looking to make sure your grain is in focus on the film. So if the grain on the film is in focus, then you can be 100% sure that you're actually in focus. Sometimes peaking isn't 100% accurate, so I don't purely rely on just that, but that's just some kind of tip that might help you ensure that you're getting the right focus when you're scanning your film. And then from there, it's like just blowing air with the rocket blower, taking a picture, sliding the next frame through, and then just rinse and repeat until you get through the whole roll, making sure you don't have any dust on there, making sure everything's in focus, and then from there it's pretty painless and seamless. Overall, if you've done everything right, you should have your whole roll scanned in the form of raw files or whatever, and ready to convert the images in Lightroom or whatever you use. So personally, I use Negative Lab Pro to convert my images. I've tried multiple different things like Film Lab and other stuff like that, but I've noticed that Negative Lab Pro provides me the best scans and the best conversions, the most color accurate ones, and the ones that I'm most happy with. So that's what I've stuck to. It's a Lightroom extension, so unfortunately, if you don't use Lightroom, you'll have to use some other software, or you'd have to get Lightroom, which is the only annoying downside to it, is that I still have to have Lightroom to use Negative Lab Pro, but otherwise, film scans look great. In terms of actual process, I'll kind of walk you guys through the steps that I do. So I'll import all my images into Lightroom, and then I'll start by setting the white balance. Setting white balance, you would just click on this like eyedrop tool, and then you'd set the white balance to the film border. That's how you'd achieve a kind of neutral white balance. And then from there, I would crop into my images. Like I said, most of the time, if I'm shooting 35mm, the aspect ratio is the same, so I don't have to worry too much about that. But for my medium format shots, I'll have to crop to a 1x1 square, and then I lose that kind of, resolution on the sides, but it's not too big of a deal. And then once you've cropped into your image, then you can go into your plugin manager or your plugin extensions, click on Negative Lab Pro, and then get ready to convert your negative. I like to keep my settings on mostly default, and then I like to use the Noritsu scan. A lot of people like to use between Frontier and Noritsu. Personally, I have a preference for the kind of tones and colors that Noritsu gets, but honestly, it doesn't matter too much. And then from there, I'll just go about editing my photos. Typically with film photos, I don't edit too much. I just kind of go and tweak in some settings if it's too bright, or if I want to make it brighter, or if I want to change some certain settings between lab standard or, cinematic log or rich or something like that, then I'll do so there. Sometimes I'll make some kind of color tweaks and adjustments if I feel like it's a little too much on the magenta side, or if the development of the lab kind of had it a little bit too warm, or whatever it happens to be. You can tweak and find out your settings in there, and then you could just click apply, and then you'll have your conversion, which is honestly one of the most satisfying parts. Seeing your negative become a real image is very satisfying, and then it can be sometimes be a hit or miss, because you're not going to get the right negative, or it's not going to look good, or you'll see some kind of problems that you took with a shot. But that's kind of the whole experience or process of shooting film, or at least that's what I'm kind of trying to tell myself as, is to not worry about too much if your film shot doesn't look right, because that's just part of the whole process. But that's the problem with film, is that sometimes if you have a botched film image, you can only do so much to save that image. So it is what it is, move on, let go, go on to the next image. The next thing I like to do is go through kind of a dust removal or a spot removal with the healing brush inside Lightroom. And the Lightroom tool works really, really well. And I would recommend doing this because sometimes with digital scans and even with the rocket blower, you are going to miss a lot of dust or little like flakes and stuff that you didn't notice before. And sometimes development can leave certain spots on your film image as well, and it's quite easy. You just click Q and then go through and click and remove all the little spots in the skies that you might see on your film image. Typically, I just stick to the ones that I can see or the ones that are most noticeable. After that, pretty much the whole editing process is done. You have your film image and then you're just going to rinse and repeat and go through all your images. I know a lot of people like to do kind of like batch processing. Personally, I don't like to do that because I have a kind of anal worrying that I might get some image wrong, or some image is not going to look 100% like I want it to, or if I shot certain images in the wrong lighting condition or different lighting conditions, then I want to edit it and process it differently. So I like to go through each single individual process myself. And while that can be a little bit tedious and a little bit annoying, personally I find it a little more rewarding. I just like converting each individual negative. So that's personally how I like to do it. You can go through whatever process you'd like to do. And that's pretty much it. By then you pretty much have all your film scans converted into images, and you should be happy, ready to share your images with other people, or ready to print your images or put them in a photo book or whatever it happens to be. Hopefully this gave you guys some sort of insight on how I like to go about scanning film, and then maybe if you want to have the same setup or consider using the same setup, this is personally what I find to be the most efficient way for me, but other methods work just as well. I'm tired. That was a lot of talking. Hopefully I wasn't too much jumbled all over the place and it made sense for you guys. But yeah, if you guys have a particular way you like scanning film, please share down below, leave it down below. I think other people will find your methods or your choices insightful, and they might go that route as well. So it'll be helpful. Leave a comment. If you have any questions as well, please leave them down below. I'll try and get back to you because I probably missed something in this video, but we're working on it, you know. And if you like this video, please like the video down below. Subscribe to this channel for more film photography and not just other photography stuff in general. And hopefully I'll see you guys in another video. Thanks as always for watching. Peace.